Okay, so in our last video, we created a VBA script that would take a single Excel range that we specified in our workbook, and it would copy that range to a PowerPoint presentation. Now, if you've watched the other videos in this series, we always start working out with one object, so in this case, one range object, and then we move on to the scenario where we have multiple objects that we want to export to a PowerPoint presentation. So in this video, we are going to create a VBA script that will now export not just one range, but multiple ranges across our entire workbook. Now in my workbook, I already have some Excel ranges that are populated. So I've got two on the sheet that's named 1, I've got another one on sheet 2, and then a final one on sheet 3. And the goal is to write a script that's going to export all of these ranges to a PowerPoint presentation. So the first thing I want to do is I want to go in my VBA editor. If you haven't already, you need to make sure you insert a module or use an existing one. And then, like in all the other videos we've done using PowerPoint, we now have to enable an object library. That object library is for PowerPoint objects. And so this will allow us to create and manipulate PowerPoint objects from within the VBA editor. And so how we enable it is we go up to our toolbar, so right up here. We go to Tools, down to References, and then from here you're going to have a new window pop up. Now for most users, you're not going to see it like mine. You're not going to see this object library called Microsoft PowerPoint Object Library up at the top. If you're new to using this library, you're going to have to scroll down. So you're going to have to scroll down to M for Microsoft, and then you're going to go to the P section, and you'll see it there. So you're going to have to go and find the Microsoft PowerPoint Object Library. Now, depending on the version of Office you're using, you might see a different number than what you're seeing on my screen. So I'm running the latest version of Office, so I see a 16. But if you're running Office 13, you're going to see a 15. And then if you're running Office 2010, you're going to see a 14. Regardless of what version you have, everything should work the same. So what you want to do is you just want to make sure that the box is checked like that. And then after that, you just press OK. So now we can actually start writing the subroutine. So I'm going to create a subroutine called export multiple ranges to PowerPoint. After that, press enter, then tab. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to declare PowerPoint variables. So these are going to house the PowerPoint objects that we're going to manipulate from within the script. The first one is going to be called PPT app. This one is going to house a PowerPoint application object, so the PowerPoint application itself. The next one is going to be called PPT pres. This is going to house a PowerPoint presentation object, so that presentation is going to be in the application, but it's going to be the actual presentation itself, so something we can add slides to and all sorts of other stuff. And then the final one is going to be PPT slide. So this is actually going to be a PowerPoint slide object, and so we add that slide to our presentation. From here, we need to declare the Excel variables, so the variables that will house our Excel ranges. The first one is going to be called Excel range. This is going to be a range object. A range object, well, that's just a collection of cells really, so this is considered a range object that we can manipulate with, and we can do things like copy, paste it, all sorts of fun stuff. And then the next one we got to declare, it's a kind of special variable, but it's called range array. And this one's going to have a special type. It's going to have a variant data type. And so the variant data type, it's kind of like this open box type. It, in a sense, is we're not telling VBA yet what kind of data type it is until later in the script. So later in the script, we will formally declare what type of data our range array variable will house, but as of right now, we're kind of just putting this placeholder in a sense. And so we're saying, well, expect something to populate this variable later, but until then, we're not going to tell you what type of variable it is. And so after we've done that, we're going to actually create our PowerPoint application and then our presentation and slides. So the first thing we have to do is create a new instance of PowerPoint. So that means we've got to take that PPT app and we've got to set it equal to a new PowerPoint application. So a new instance of PowerPoint. And then we want to make sure that we can see our application after it's created. So we're going to say, okay, take that instance and then set the visible property of that instance equal to true. So in other words, make sure that I can see it when we create it. And so when we run it, this is what we'll get. We get an application, but unfortunately there's no presentation or slide. We have to do each one of those steps ourselves. So the next thing we want to do is we want to create a new presentation. So that means set PPT_pres, that object variable that we declared above. Now we're actually going to say, hey, let's have it contain a presentation. And we're going to say, okay, go into the PPT app object and then go to the presentations collection and then add a new presentation to the application. And so this way we can now reference this presentation that we added by just calling PPT_pres. And this presentation will live within the presentations collection. So again, a collection is like a group of objects. Well, in this case, this presentations collection contains a bunch of presentation objects. Well, before we called the add method, there was none in there, but after we called the add method, now we're going to have one presentation in our collection. And then since we've created a presentation, we want to make sure that presentation has at least a slide in it, but we're going to create that slide later in the script. So the next thing that I want to do is I want to take this range array variable and I want to formally define what it is. Well, the goal is I want that range array to somehow house a reference to all the ranges that I want to export from my workbook. So I want to figure out a way to reference all of these ranges at once. Well, there's a cool thing that we can actually do. So something we can do is we can take that range array and we can set it equal to a special object in a sense. And so this object is called an array. And an array is like, it's a list. And so this list is it's a collection of different variables. So we can put different types of variables in this array or this list. And we just have to separate each one of these variables by a comma. So for example, what I can actually do is I can say, hey, go to worksheets 1 and then go to the range that I want to export. Well, I wrote down that the first one I want to export is from A1 to C5. And so this is now considered the first element in my array. It holds a variable that references a range, so an Excel range. But I don't want to just export just this one range. I want to export all the ranges. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this. I'm going to put a comma. And then I'm going to put the next range that I want to export. Well, that second range still belongs on worksheets 1. But now it's going to be the range A10 to C14. And now there's 2 more ranges that I have to add. So the third one, well, that's coming from worksheets 2, and that's the range that's C2 to E6. So that's my third range. And then my fourth and final range, well, this one's coming from worksheets 3, and it's going to be from range B2 to D6. So again, let's just look over this. We know an array is a list of variables. So it's a list of different types of variables. And what I've put in here are just different types of ranges. And I've separated each one of the ranges by a comma. Now, the other thing that we have to keep in mind about arrays is they're what we call zero base. So being zero base means that the first element is in a position of 0, the second one is in a position of 1, the third one is in a position of 2, and the fourth and final element in our array is in a position of 3. So it's still 4 elements or 4 objects in our array, but we're starting our positions at 0, vice 1. And so we'll see why that's important later when we're actually looping through this array, and we're actually going to be creating the slides. We'll see why that's important. Sorry, I forgot to put my little note, but I'm going to say create an array that houses references to the ranges we want to export. That's how I think about it. And now the next thing we want to do is we want to loop through this array. We want to copy the range, create a new slide, and then paste the range in the slide. So, how do we loop through an array? Well, ideally, we want to start at this lower end of the position of the array. So we want to start at the lower end of our array, and we want to work our way up to the top of our array, so the upper bound of our array. So we want to start at 0, go to 1, go to 2, and then go to 3. So we'll write a for loop like we normally do. We'll pass through x and say, hey, x is where basically our starting position is at. But the nice thing about arrays is that there's these special functions that we can kind of wrap around our array that will return certain information. Well, one of those special types of function is called the lower bound function. So I pass through my array, and then this will this will return the first position of the element. So it basically will return a 0. So it will return a 0. And so what I'm saying is, okay, start at x, and then go to the upper bound of my range array. And so the upper bound function, this returns the position of the last element in our array, which would be 3. So really how we can think about this is it's going to be for x equals 0 to 3. And so what we want to do is once we're looping through this array, the first thing we want to do is set a reference to the range we want to export. And so that means take that Excel range object that we declared above and just set that equal to the range array, and then pass through the x that we're on to return each element. So this will return, so when x equals 0, it's like we're replacing this with this. And so we're saying, hey, set the Excel range equal to this one when x is equal to 0. When x is equal to 1, well, then our Excel range will equal this. When x is equal to 2, our Excel range will equal this. And then when x is equal to 3, our Excel range will equal this. So basically, we're just saying, hey, return each element of our array. And then once we have a reference to that range, let's copy the range. So that means call the Excel range and then call the copy method to copy it to our clipboard. And then once we've done that, we want to create a new slide in the presentation. So we've done this before. We're just going to set the PPT slide equal to the PPT pres object, go into the slides collection, and then call the add method. Not the add slide method, the add method. And then normally what we have to do is pass through 2 parameters. The first one is the position of my slide. So basically when I create it, which position do I want it to belong to? And then the second one is the layout of my slide. So do I want it to be a title only, a blank slide, or a text slide? So for the first parameter, the position parameter, I'm going to pass through x plus 1. So why did I do that? Well, let's think about this for a second, because we want each range to have its own slide, right? And so I want to leverage this for loop to help create my slides. And so what I'm saying is I know it's going to loop through 4 times, so it gives me the opportunity to create 4 slides. But the only problem is my x is starting at a 0. Well, I can't pass through a 0 as a parameter in the add method, because it's going to say, well, add a slide, but add it to position 0. There is no position 0 that I can add it to. So unfortunately, it would return an error. However, if I add 1 to it, then it would work. And then the nice thing is that this one, so when x is equal to 0, that would belong to slide 1. Well, when x is equal to 1, I want to make sure that this belongs to slide 2. So really, I still need to add 1 to it. So it would still be x plus 1 to return a 2. So that way, this one can belong to slide 2. And then this one, I want it to be slide 3. Well, if I add 1 to 2, that will be 3. And then this final one, I want to be on the 4th slide. So when x is equal to 3 in this array, I still need to add 1 to it, so that way this number is 4. So as you can see, all we're doing is we're leveraging that loop, but the only thing that we had to do is we have to add 1 to it to make sure that each range belongs to the appropriate slide. And then with that, like we said, we still need to choose our layout. So I'm just going to do a blank one. And then there we go. So now we've created our slide. And then from there, we want to paste the range in the slide. So we're going to go into the slide, go to the shapes collection, and call the paste method. So this will paste that range into our slide. And then I just want to close my loop and make sure that, hey, keep going until you reach the end of that loop. So this is pretty much the entire script. So let's run it and see what we get. So the first slide, well, that has our first range. The second slide, okay, that's got our second range. Third slide, okay, we've got our third range. And then our fourth one, we've got our fourth range. Okay, so it did exactly like what we wanted it to. It took all the ranges in our workbook and it exported them to the PowerPoint presentation. So now we can take multiple Excel ranges in our workbook and then copy them over to a PowerPoint presentation. Now, the only thing I want to let people know about this line right here is there's technically multiple different ways that I could pass through the range that I want to export. So for example, we've all seen that we can select sheets using the sheets index method. So that's just, hey, we take the sheets collection and then we pass through the index, and then we normally would just, pass through the range that we want to export. So this is a completely valid method for passing through the ranges in our array. The other way, and not so commonly used, is we can use something called, it's right over here, but it's the unqualified object name. And so it's interesting. It's not covered a lot, but basically what that means is if we look in the VBA editor, we actually see all the Excel worksheet objects in our workbook, and each one of them has something called an unqualified object name. And that's something that we can only see from the VBA editor. And so really, if we pass through the sheet 1, this is referencing sheet 1, and what I can do is I can still pass through that range. So again, it's just a different way to write this range, but it's still a qualified way of doing it. So you can pass through either the method that I did up through here, or you could do it like this, the second one like this, or the third method. Each one of them will get you the same result, but again, sometimes it's easier to work with one way versus the other way. So I like to show all the different ways that sometimes we can do it, and then, let people choose from there. So that concludes this video. If you have any questions, please comment below, because I know sometimes this can be a little bit of a confusing topic. So if you're having trouble with your scripts, hopefully I can walk you through the issue. But yeah, if you have questions, don't hesitate to ask them. And then always, if you can like and subscribe, that always helps a lot. But we'll see you in the next video. Thanks.